Yo, what's going on, APUSH peeps? We have a great video for you today on sectional conflict between 1820 and 1860. This to me is screaming an essay question or a short answer question. Essay topic could be something like explain the reasons for the growth of sectional conflict between 1820 and 1860. You'll be able to explain this in detail by the end of this video. Before we begin, it is shout out time. 3 special shout outs to Dr. Lopez's class in Albuquerque, and Mr. Horton's class from South High School, and finally Ms. Holliday's class in Sacramento. I appreciate you very much for your support. Best of luck on the upcoming exam. You will all do great. Some big ideas to know. Westward expansion, or Manifest Destiny, was a huge cause of conflict, and you may be asking yourself why. It's because the question that the country would face is, would this new land be free or slave? The Mexican-American War was a watershed event or a turning point in U.S. history. I got a video on that if you want to know more about that. As time went on, compromises did not solve issues but made them worse. We see this in the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act as well. These two compromises sought to alleviate the slavery issue, but it actually made them worse. And Abe Lincoln, when we get to him, he campaigned on the non-extension of slavery or a free soil platform. He did not campaign on abolishing slavery. All right, jumping on over to the Missouri Compromise from 1820. Missouri, they applied to be a state in the Louisiana Territory, and this would upset the balance of free and slave states. While this bill was introduced for Missouri to become a state, there was a Talmadge Amendment, which would allow for emancipation of children of slaves in the state of Missouri. And this did not go over well in the South. The House approved it, but the Senate rejected it. And the Senate was able to reject it because of that balance of free and slave states. So 3 parts of the compromise you should know. Number 1, Missouri, they enter as a slave state. Maine enters as a free state. And then we have this 3630 line right here. Everything above it in the future would be a free state, and everything below would be a slave state. And this only applies to the Louisiana Territory. And just be aware of Kansas and Nebraska right over here, because we will come back to that. Now, how did it increase tensions? Well, if you ask Thomas Jefferson, he said, "This momentous question, like a fire bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. I considered it at once the death knell of the Union. It is hushed indeed for the moment, but this is a reprieve only, not a final sentence. A geographical line coinciding with a marked principle, moral and political, once conceived and held up to the angry passions of men, will never be obliterated, and every new irritation will mark it deeper and deeper." So he was not a fan of this at all. Now, there will also be a huge desire to keep the balance of free and slave states equal going forward, which will further divide the North and the South. And this will be overturned 34 years later by the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which we will get to. Okay, Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848. The U.S. won the war and it gained the Mexican cession. Now, there was a bill that was introduced called the Wilmot Proviso by this dude, David Wilmot, and it proposed banning slavery in all territory gained from Mexico. This passed the House, but not the Senate. At the end of the war, Texas claimed much more land than they have today, which we'll get to in a second. And how did this lead to increased tensions? Well, let's ask Ralph Waldo Emerson, the famous transcendentalist writer. He said, "The United States will conquer Mexico." He said this before the war. "But it will be as the man swallows the arsenic, which brings him down in turn. Mexico will poison us." And he's talking about slavery, and he is absolutely right. Okay, Compromise of 1850, dealing with the land from the Mexican cession. This was a series of laws passed in response to the war. And there are 5 parts that you need to know, and the creators of this compromise were one Henry Clay at age 72 and the little giant Stephen Douglas. First part, popular sovereignty in the Mexican cession, which means that people living in the territory get to decide whether that land will be free or slave. There is a more strict Fugitive Slave Act, and I have this started because this is really going to upset the North. Daniel Webster, a senator from Massachusetts, actually gives a speech on the 7th of March, which is called the 7th of March speech, in which he urges the North to support the Fugitive Slave Act. And this is a very unpopular act in the North. Slave trade in Washington, D.C. was abolished. California was added as a free state, and Texas was paid money to give up the territory that it was claiming that is beyond its borders that we know today. So how did this compromise lead to tensions? With the fugitive slave law, which will lead to personal liberty laws, with the North essentially nullifying the fugitive slave law, and many Northerners will turn abolitionists. They are furious with this. They can't believe that this Fugitive Slave Act was passed. And there were tensions in Congress, so much so that one senator, Thomas Hart Benton, was almost shot by another senator, Foote, when he pulled a gun on him, and Benton screamed, "Let the assassin fire." So there were guns being pulled on each other in the Senate. So much tension in the Senate. Crazy stuff. All right, Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. Both Kansas and Nebraska, they were above that 3630 line in the Louisiana Purchase. So we know they both should have been free states. However, this act changes it, and it's created by Stephen Douglas, the Little Giant again. This allowed for popular sovereignty in Kansas and Nebraska with the expectation that Kansas would be slave and Nebraska would be free. So you have that kind of balance there of free and slave states. So how does this lead to tension? Well, fighting breaks out in Kansas. You got dudes like John Brown going over to Kansas with some of his sons, and they start killing pro-slavery individuals. In the Capitol building, you have Charles Sumner getting caned by Preston Brooks when he criticized what was going on in Kansas. And the Republican Party will be formed as a result of this act, and they will have a free soil platform, only leading to further tensions between the North and the South. 3 years later, we have the Dred Scott decision. Dred Scott, a slave, sued for his freedom. The Supreme Court ruled that slaves were property and could not be taken away. They also said that all African Americans are not citizens, whether they are free or slave, and Congress could not legislate slavery in the territory. So they basically said that Compromise of 1820 was unconstitutional. Now, how did this lead to increased tensions? The North is furious, and many still advocated the idea of popular sovereignty, particularly Stephen Douglas. So he's basically arguing that, people, if they want to, could not follow the Supreme Court. By the way, I have videos on every single one of these topics, more detailed videos if you want to check them out. All right, Harper's Ferry, John Brown, he's back again. He and others, lots of his sons again, and some other people, they tried to lead a slave rebellion, and they took over the second largest arsenal in the country at Harper's Ferry, hence the name. He was eventually captured and hanged, and he was hiding out in this little firehouse down here, and he was hanged about 2 months after the raid. It was a huge failure because nobody knew that he was taking over this arsenal. So how did it lead to increased tensions? Well, the South saw many in the North as John Browns. They thought this was the first of many attacks to come, and they thought many people in the North sympathized and supported John Brown. So this further divided the North and the South. We'll finish up with the election of 1860. This is a four-way race between the Little Giant, Lincoln, Bell, and Breckinridge. Since the Democrats were split, you have the North supporting Douglas and the South supporting Breckinridge. Lincoln will win the presidency without winning a single Southern state. Anywhere in the South here, you'll notice there is no red or Lincoln's color. So he wins without winning a single Southern state. And the South is basically furious. They can't believe that a president can win without winning a single state in the South. Lincoln again ran on a free soil platform, the non-extension of slavery, and this will lead to increased tensions because many in the South feared that Lincoln would abolish slavery. And shortly after the election, beginning with South Carolina, Southern states began to secede, and the Civil War broke out on April 12th, 1861. Okay, quick recap. Westward expansion leads to debates over slavery. 3 parts of the Missouri Compromise, no all 3. Mexican-American War as a turning point because we have a huge debate over slavery, including the Wilmot Proviso. Compromise of 1850, no all 5 parts. Kansas-Nebraska Act and Bleeding Kansas because of fighting breaking out. The Dred Scott decision, what did the Supreme Court rule? Harper's Ferry, how did that lead to tensions? And finally, the election of 1860, wicked important. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate it. Best of luck on all of your exams, especially the one in May. You will do great. You are brilliant, and have a good day.